All right, well, I guess I'll just take that as a cue to go ahead and get started. All right, so welcome to April's virtual Tableau user group. It really sucks that we can't meet up in person to go through this and answer questions in a crowd, but this is the next best thing. So I'm Sean. I'm going to walk us through today's presentation. I know that we planned for a whole hour, but I think we'll probably be done in 20 to 30 minutes when I'm the only one that's allowed to talk. Things will probably go pretty fast because I'll probably just not stop. So if you have questions, please post in the chat or ask me to slow down. So today it's going to be me, Kent, who will be monitoring the Q&A section and answering questions as I go. Kent will also be listening and calling out if I glaze over or miss otherwise important information to call out. This was to be the responsibility of Matt Hughes, a coworker of ours, but he got pulled onto a project and won't be joining us today. That's all right. Future dates to look forward to. In June, we're going to do a Makeover Monday challenge. So if you have a dashboard that you think could be visually upgraded, or you want to make something just for fun, let us know and we'll work on that together. And Kent and I will walk through some of the visual best practices and how to apply them to existing or not yet created dashboards. In August, we're going to be looking to you guys as a group to maybe present some of the more interesting things that you've created, or if you have an idea for something that could be really cool. Again, let us know, and Kent and I would be more than happy to work with you and try to figure out how to get that put into software. And then lastly is designing for data in October. Last year, we brought in the Interworks design team, and they talked through some of their points. It was a pretty good session, so we're going to go back for seconds on that one this year. June will probably be a virtual meeting, and August probably will be two. Who knows? No one knows. It's a mystery. The good news is, like this, they will be recorded, and so if you don't get the chance to attend virtually, as everyone's calendars just get flooded with invites, we will be posting these up. The plan for today's conversation is going to be, what are Viz animations? How do they work? How to effectively deploy dynamic parameters in Workbook, and other miscellaneous. If you have questions, comments, queries, if you have a dog or a cat that's working from home with you, post them in the chat. Kent will be collecting these over the course of the call and preparing answers for them in the Q&A section. So also be aware that the Q&A and the chat at the bottom right of the WebEx feature are different and separate, even though they look together. It's very confusing. And with that, we will dive right into the content of today's talk. And so the first thing that I wanted to show was this dashboard that was built by a guy named Mark Reed. So this is used on Tableau's product page for the release of 2020.1. And I thought this dashboard did a fantastic job at displaying the use case of the visual animations. So this is the ever popular Hans Rosling's TED Talk about the world and how it's changed since 1962. And his play button just cycles through all of the different pages. So, the page cycler moving, and as we click through the different filters, we can see these animations lining items up, rearranging them. If we were particularly interested in highlighting South Asia, oh, I guess it doesn't stick. I thought it did. That's fine. And also the one of the greatest new features, I think, is that this Pages button now works on the web. And so that's going to help a lot with promoting the animations. Group them smaller into the areas. But definitely check this out. I think you did a great job with a very interesting data set. So how do you deploy these on your own? So Tableau has built in a new control panel, which you can find under the format field and animations. So if you just navigate to this pane in your workbook or your dashboard, you'll be presented with a handful of new options. There is a workbook default and a selected sheet default. So you can set the sheet will override the workbook default every time. And so you can have different animation, speed, and style on both of these items. As far as speed, there are 4 settings. I haven't played with custom yet. I think you may just be able to enter in how fast you would like it to move. And you're also able to adjust style with simultaneous and sequential. So we're going to look closer at the differences between speeds and sequential in the next slides. But simultaneous and sequential mean exactly what they are. So the simultaneous style, everything happens at once. And in the sequential style, the x-axis will first sort itself, and then the y-axis will sort itself. And if you have the speed set to real slow, it can produce pretty interesting effects. So let's look at Viz animation. A good note to keep in mind is that the speed that you set on your pages bar is not the same as the speed that you set for your animations. So I'm going to set my speed to fast, and we're going to see what fast animation looks like down here. And so you'll notice that the bars are quickly moving. You really don't have time to read or follow them, on their journey through. You kind of just see where they end up. And when speed is set to slow, we can watch the orange dots really travel along, really drag out or emphasize their movement across the axis. So I think a good use case for fast is you don't want the viewer to really follow a trend. You just want them to recognize that things are moving around. And we can slow the speed way down in order to help people connect the dots or recognize a trend. The next thing we'll look at is the Viz animation styles. So there's 2 styles, sequential, simultaneous. I have the same view set up operating off of a shared filter. So when we watch the sequential on the left, see the bars change in length and then reorder themselves. As we're over on the right, the simultaneous bars, everything's happening all at once. It's kind of fun. And then the next new feature is the dynamic parameter controls. So these guys are pretty great. So you have 2 new options when you're creating a parameter. The first option is when workbook opens, which is down here at the bottom right, and value when workbook opens. So your list of values can now be populated by a calculated field or a field in your data source, which will refresh every time the workbook opens. And you can also have that value set to a specific target every time the workbook is opened. And so I'll show you guys an example of that now. So I built this map with the sales store data set, and I have this date selector that lets me pick any time I like. So this is a parameter selector. It's the same one from the screenshot before. I populated the list with a calculated field, and I have it set to the current value as a calculated field as well. And I'll show you what those look like. But if I had this workbook set to March, and I saved this workbook, I'll just save it to my desktop real quick. The next time that I open it, my view is going to be back to the max date of December 19. So if you have a list of dates that's constantly growing, your parameters are going to be able to pick up those new dates. And then it's also going to be able to use the most current information when popular, like when setting the parameter, which is pretty cool. This is something that you would have otherwise had to do with some pretty hacky calculated fields, but no longer. And so to create those fields, I started with the order date is the field that I have. I parsed that down to the order date month. So I just used a date trunk formula to give me just the month of that item. And I used a max date formula. So the list is being populated by the values over here, and the parameter is being populated by the values in max date. And there's a whole lot of other features that came out in 2020.1. The whole list can be found at tableau.com/2020-1-features. But the big ones that I felt like would probably have a change in your day-to-day day-to-day kind of processes were buffer calculations. So these guys are pretty neat, and they're able to create a radius around a singular point and show overlap. There's been Salesforce connector updates. From what I understand, they've overhauled entirely the way that they connect to Salesforce. This is likely a direct result of the Salesforce acquisition of Tableau. I know a couple of you guys were asking like, hey, what's different? What's changed? This is probably that. There's a new item that you can add to your dashboard, which is a download image, PDF, or PowerPoint button that you can put on the page. So I thought that was pretty convenient. From a server perspective, there are now improved permissions dialogues. So they've overhauled the way that you interact with permissions for particular users, groups, and projects. Like I mentioned earlier, the play button now works in the browser. They've added Viz-in tooltip to the web developer, which is pretty exciting. We just see more and more features being added to the web dev. And login license management. So this is actually a pretty big one that is going to change the way that you manage your license keys pretty significantly, and hopefully for the better. There's been a handful of changes to Tableau Prep. So they are continuing to build on Tableau Prep and Tableau Conductor, which is exciting to see. So they've added LOD calcs to the Tableau Prep. They've also allowed Tableau Prep to be scheduled on the server. So if you have the data management hat on, you're able to schedule prep flows, and they will now successfully execute on server schedules. They've also added more SQL parameters to the prep queries. So you can now use specific Tableau server users in your initial SQL queries when creating Tableau prep flows. That pretty much wraps up all of the new content that came in 2020.1. I know, and again, I've blazed through this in record time in about 12 minutes. So let me know if you guys have any questions in the Q&A or in the chat, or if you would like me to drill in and show specific examples of maybe how I built some of these. Or if Kent, you had anything that's specific that you would like to call out that you think I may have overlooked.
Yeah, just while people are thinking and hopefully putting in some questions, if they have any, one other use case for the dynamic parameters that I've had a request for in the past but didn't really have a solution for was the idea that I've got, say, 4 different regions that I can filter a report by, and I want a given user to look at the report and have the report load their region first, but still have access to look at the other regions. we could do that through a calculation to kind of identify what groups people are in. So that would be another kind of handy use case of you could set a report to load a particular way for a group of people while still allowing them the ability to look at other kind of potential report. So that kind of have it default to what's relevant to them while still giving them access to other content. Whereas in the past, we've done that with like row level security, but then that locks them out of seeing the other potential splits in the report.
Yeah, so you would use the, a calculated field to identify a user's group, set that to the value when the workbook opens.
Yeah, and worth calling out with this is that you need to have either all values, so they can put in whatever value they want, or an explicit list of values. At this point in time, the dynamic parameters does not work with a range date option. So if we select range, our current value option gets grayed out and gets removed. So you have to use either a parameter that is all values are valid, or it's a list. We cannot use a numeric or date range.
Oh, also, I'd call out that the field that you use to populate the list of values in your parameter does have to be in the same format as the value that you use to drive the when the workbook opens. So these are two separate calculated fields, and they have to be in the exact same format, or else Tableau won't recognize that they're related. That was something that I ran into that was actually quite annoying.
Yeah, so Matt called out they thought this looked similar to the animation settings in like PowerPoint. So key thing with this is that one, I'll call it with the animations, the order of this is that it removes values that would have disappeared. It changes the length of the bars, and say like a bar chart, and then it'll resort them. So the part is for some clients, the animation is just a novel visual. I think with like the bar charts, for me, particularly charts like a scatter plot, where you might have an outlier point, and where the animation becomes useful from like interpreting the data standpoint would be a case where you can follow the movement of an outlier from one position to another. Whereas in a traditional scatter plot, you can only really see the outliers in the pattern. And if a point moves from one spot to the next, it's really hard to find where that point moved to. And so that's what the animations really give us. It can also just be slick to put it on a loop and be able to cycle through it in a presentation if you're presenting it. But one, it is just fun to use in a presentation, but two, it in particular with things like scatter plots, it helps us track the progression of points when we have a lot of points. In this case, when each point is uniquely color coded, it's fairly easy. But if say you go into the more detailed one, as you flip through, you could then see, depending upon how smoothly we set up the animation. In this case, it kind of jumps from one year to the next. It isn't like a data set where we have a day-by-day progression. So it jumps, but we can now see that movement with those.
I think this is actually set to skip every 5 years.
Okay, I didn't know if it was granularity or just the nature of the data collection was.
Yeah, he set it specifically for 5-year skips. Let's make a quick edit. Oh, is it because the controller is the same as the other? Yeah.
You want to really fill
out. Yeah, here it is.
Okay.
Oh, well, I broke it.
Oh, well. That is a really good video. If people have
strong.
Rosling TED Talk, if you want to fill in time, you could have just played the TED Talk, but we won't do that. But besides that, I don't see any other questions coming in. So one, this is in 2020.1. So that's been out now for a couple of months. It's one that I would say people could start testing out in their test environments to look at upgrading to that one. I know not everybody is upgraded to the latest and greatest by any means, but just kind of to help provide a reason to push for why you would be interested in upgrading to the most recent version.
See, I feel like we've got 2 questions around dynamic parameters on the server. I've not used them on a server environment yet. I guess it could be a good way to spend my time to try to push up this dynamic parameter workbook and see if I can replicate some of the same things that you guys have in the Q&A.
So one would be just being careful that whatever it's trying to update to has to be in that parameter list. If it is in any way different, it will only update to things that exist on that list. So it has to be an exact match. I don't know if that was what happened in that case. And dynamic parameters are a setting option inside of a regular parameter. So it isn't like there's a separate path for creating a dynamic parameter versus a regular parameter. It's a regular parameter window, and it now just has a couple of options that we can now select to pipe in values. Easier to modify the Excel sheet values or through Tableau. I think with that, he's talking about the date groupings. Typically, if it's just a temporary kind of scaffold of a thing, I would do it in Tableau. But if it's like particular groups of things, like for example, if I'm recoding a group of states into a region, like that's the type of thing that I would want to do on the data source side. If it's something that needs to be maintained long term, I would want to do it on the data side. For date groupings or the main grouping that it's predictable enough and consistent that I would be okay with doing it through a calculation. But if it's an actual grouping of like products or regions or people and the departments, those types of groupings we'd want to handle inside the data set.
Question came in, do we create the dynamic parameter the same way as the regular? Yeah, absolutely. So you would just right click in any of your fields over here, create parameter, and then the new options show up when you convert to list. And so you can populate values from one of your fields, or you can set it to be dynamic and populate values when the workbook opens based on a field. So yeah, those new options added to the creation pane.
Andy mentioned if there's any particular Tableau Online dashboard, so that the very first one that you showed was available on Tableau Online. I don't know if you can copy paste the link into the chat or something if you have that handy.
I do not.
I don't know if there's any others that are listed by Tableau on their website, but pull from those.
Yeah, I will go find the link for this dashboard by Mark Reed, and I will put it up in the email that we'll send out after the call. So you guys can check out an example of this in the online environment. No, we're not currently running a any kind of repository for past examples. If you would like to review something or get something specifically, you can email us, and I'll be more than happy to forward it on over. And I think that that also goes for Lou, who asked a question about working on a health-related dashboard. If you need help with anything specifically or you have questions, yeah, please feel free to reach out to us at the email that's listed on the invite or on the Tableau user group page itself for myself or Kent. It should just be sean.spencer@interworks.com.
Just to comment on, Eric had a question on being able to update the parameter list. So the key thing there is you need a calculation that would remove the particular exclusions you might have from a field. So it would say like, if this or this or this, like it would drop those out. And then you could set your parameter to update off of that list. So that way new options in your product list would feed through in your parameter list, but you could still filter out particular products that you didn't want to see in that list. So that would be an option you could do with this. please asking about the notes on the SQL management.
Yeah, so there wasn't a note on SQL management so much as there was a note on SQL parameters. So there's the four new Tableau specific parameters that you can now plug into the prep environment to drive more unique queries. Was that what your question was about?
Yeah. It's talking about the SQL parameters. And Eric asked about using TopIn, if we could use that to update a dynamic parameter. I haven't tested out if there's any restrictions around using table calculations to update a parameter. I assume it would work, but
yeah, you absolutely should be able to use the TopIn as long as it's as long as you do it in a calculated field, right?
yeah, as long as it's a calculation that you can feed into that.
So yeah, as long as in your calculated field, you adjust the format to match the exact format as the field that's being populated, then you'll be able to use it to drive the dynamic parameter. And by format, I mean like the specific, the specific, date type format or number type format. Cool. Well, I think we'll go ahead and close out the Q&A there. If you guys have additional questions, like I said, forward them to Kent or I. You can find our emails on the user group page. I'm pretty sure we're also on the emails that we've been sending. We may send out a short poll to see if you guys like the virtual meetup, what we could do different for next time that would make it more worth your time. Thanks for hanging out, and see you in this month's content. And I hope you guys are able to take some of these visual animations or the dynamic parameter ideas and apply them to some of your workbooks. If you do, and you do it in a clever way, let us know, and maybe we can present on it in the next setting. Thanks for hanging out, everyone.